What if the only thing that made you valuable was your womb? Not your mind, not your words, not your desires, just your ability to breed, to carry life, to bleed, again and again. In royal courts across history, queens were not chosen for love or leadership. They were selected like livestock, inspected, judged, and placed into dynasties as human incubators. Their names are etched in gold, but behind those names were swollen bellies, stillborn cradles, and a silence that no coronation could erase. This isn't the history of empires rising. This is the history of bodies breaking. Today, we look into the hidden, disturbing legacy of 10 royal women, praised for their fertility, yet consumed by it. These were women who bore kingdoms in their bodies and suffered in silence behind palace doors. And by the time we reach the very first woman on this list, you may never look at royal power the same way again. Now we begin with the 10th royal woman, a name crowned in power but carved in flesh. Maria Theresa of Austria, a sovereign who ruled with iron will and whose legacy stretched across Europe's courts like a living map made from her own children. She bore 16. Each pregnancy was not merely personal, it was political. Each child, a tool for alliance, a human treaty swaddled in royal silk. She mapped her womb onto the world, marrying sons and daughters into France, Naples, Tuscany, and Saxony. Every birth tightened her grip on the continent, but with each contraction, her body grew weaker, her bloodline thinner. Her house, the Habsburgs, had long practiced consanguineous unions, cousins, uncles, nieces. And now, that pattern continued. Her own children became symbols of a decaying strategy. Some were brilliant, others fragile. Several died young, one mentally disturbed, another malformed. Maria Theresa wore strength like armor, but behind the statecraft, behind the royal portraits and letters, was a woman who spent decades either pregnant or mourning. Her correspondence reveals flashes of grief, quiet, restrained, never allowed to overtake duty. Her body had become a factory for kings and queens. Her soul, a silent casualty. She ruled empires, but her true battlefield was the nursery. And in the corridors of Schönbrunn Palace, where her children once screamed and laughed, there also echoed something quieter, the sound of a woman slowly breaking under the weight of her own dynasty. This was not motherhood, it was monarchy, weaponized through reproduction. Now we move to the 9th royal woman, a queen whose womb produced kings, but whose legacy was soaked in blood. Catherine de' Medici, a name whispered with reverence and suspicion, the mother of a nation's unraveling. She gave birth to 10 children, each a potential monarch, each a piece on France's violent chessboard. In her fertility, Catherine found leverage. She was not born powerful, but she became essential. Her children were her currency, her armor, and her future, but they were also her undoing. 3 of her sons would wear the French crown. None ruled in peace. The wars of religion tore France into shards, Catholics and Huguenots, zealots and rebels. Catherine, caught between dynasties and dogmas, turned to manipulation. She arranged marriages, brokered assassinations, and whispered in council chambers. Her children's power was her lifeline and her leash. The more she clung, the more they slipped away. One died young, another became king as a sickly puppet. A daughter married into massacre. Catherine's palace became a battlefield, her nursery a vault of ticking tragedies. She was fertile not with hope, but with danger. Her sons sat on thrones made of splinters. Her daughters walked down aisles lined with blades. And through it all, Catherine watched, calculating, mourning, surviving. Her body birthed 10 royal heirs. But what emerged from her legacy was not unity, it was division, fueled by paranoia, sustained by blood. She mothered a nation, and it bled through every one of her children. Now we turn to the 8th royal woman, a queen remembered not for her voice, but for her womb. Queen Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, consort to George III of Britain, a name etched into botanical gardens, museums, and city streets. Yet few remember the woman behind it. Charlotte gave birth to 15 children. 15. In public, she was hailed as the ideal consort, gentle, modest, and endlessly dutiful. The perfect complement to a king and the perfect symbol for a growing empire. But behind the palace walls, her reality was something else entirely. She was almost always pregnant. Her days passed between confinement and childbirth, her nights in silence. Her influence at court was minimal, her voice in politics nearly absent. As her children multiplied, her identity dissolved. She became not a queen, but a mechanism, reliable, obedient, and maternal. Her portraits show grace, but rarely joy. Her letters, rare and restrained. And as she labored to populate the royal line, her husband's mind began to slip. King George III, once rational and revered, descended into madness. He spoke in riddles, shouted at walls, and vanished into delusion. Charlotte was left to raise a royal house while her husband became a ghost inside his own crown. She held the empire's future in her body, but no one asked what that cost her. Charlotte didn't rule, she reproduced. And in the empire's grand story, her name survives, not as a woman of voice or vision, but as the royal who gave Britain 15 heirs, and lost herself somewhere in the counting. Now we arrive at the seventh royal woman, a mother of emperors, a quiet force behind a crumbling throne. Empress Maria Feodorovna of Russia, born Sophie Dorothea of Württemberg, she entered the Russian court with grace and bore it 10 children, 10 royal lives drawn from her body. She married Tsar Paul I, a man paranoid and unpredictable, haunted by the ghost of his murdered father, Peter III. Their union was tense, but Maria fulfilled her role with unshakable resolve. Each child she bore was a brick in the Romanov fortress, sons and daughters who would marry into Europe's greatest dynasties or ascend Russia's blood-stained throne. But Maria was not a silent mother. She challenged palace advisors. She protected her children with a lioness's fury. When Paul was assassinated in a palace coup, she did not break. She rose. She became the Dowager Empress, outliving him by decades and guiding her sons through the brutal machinery of imperial politics. Yet her eyes saw too much. She witnessed the rise of Alexander I, then Nicholas I. She watched the empire expand and crack. She saw how the Romanovs, once divine rulers, became symbols of excess and cruelty. And though she had created the future, she could do nothing to stop its unraveling. Maria Feodorovna was not merely fertile, she was foundational. But the dynasty she built on blood and strength would one day drown in fire and revolution. She gave Russia its spine, but history gave her no power to stop it from snapping. Now we look to the sixth royal woman, one of history's most commanding matriarchs, whose blood runs through thrones across continents. Queen Victoria, revered, feared, strategically fertile. She bore 9 children, but those children were not simply heirs, they were extensions of an empire. Victoria used her womb like a diplomatic weapon. Her daughters became queens, her sons became kings, her grandchildren filled the courts of Germany, Russia, Romania, and Spain. She wasn't just a queen, she was a dynasty architect, but the price was deeper than titles. Victoria suffered through frequent pregnancies, complicated deliveries, and multiple miscarriages, and though she produced a global legacy, she remained emotionally distant from her children. Letters reveal a coldness, concerned more with their obedience than their pain. One daughter described her as impossible to please. Another, as always tired of us. Through Victoria's blood, hemophilia, the bleeding disease, entered the veins of Europe. Her son Leopold died from it. Her great-grandson, Tsarevich Alexei of Russia, was born fragile, doomed. Her womb didn't just birth royalty, it seeded a genetic curse that helped unravel empires. And yet, she remained distant, stoic, worshipped by her subjects, detached from her offspring. Victoria reigned for 63 years. She outlived 3 of her own children. She buried her husband and never removed her mourning black. But grief did not soften her, it calcified. She wasn't the heart of her family, she was the crown, and the dynasty she created would inherit her legacy, along with the silence she left behind. Now we turn to the 5th royal woman, one whose name history barely whispers, though her children shaped a kingdom. Princess Augusta of Saxe-Gotha, the mother of a king, the prisoner of a palace. She bore 9 children, including George III of Britain, but she was never granted the dignity of influence. From the moment she arrived at the Hanoverian court, she was a vessel, young, German, and politically convenient. Her every move was monitored, her letters were intercepted, her loyalties were questioned. She existed in a system that valued her solely for one function: reproduction. Augusta fulfilled that role with quiet endurance. Child after child, she bore the next generation of monarchs, dukes, and princesses. Yet even as she birthed the future of Britain, she remained an outsider. Her English was mocked, her opinions were ignored. She lived surrounded by courtiers but remained entirely alone. When her husband, Frederick, Prince of Wales, died young, Augusta was left as a widow and immediately placed under suspicion. Parliament and court factions feared her influence over the young heir, George. They stripped her of agency, watched her every decision. She became a queen mother in name only, silently pushed aside while others shaped the crown her son would inherit. Despite 9 births, she was never truly embraced. Not as a leader, not as a woman, just a broodmare, useful and then discarded. Augusta's legacy isn't written in policies or portraits. It's written in the silence between her children's births and the void where her voice should have been. Now we descend to the 4th royal woman, a queen in name, but in history, remembered more for what she lost than what she ruled. Anne of Denmark, consort to James VI of Scotland and later James I of England. She endured 12 pregnancies. Only 3 children survived. Each loss was a wound, not just to her body, but to her purpose. In a world where a queen's worth was measured in heirs, Anne bled in silence. Miscarriages came in waves. Stillbirths followed. Tiny bodies buried without names, without memory, yet they defined her life more than any royal title. James kept her at the edges of politics. She was given palaces, jewels, and ceremonial duties, but never real power. She turned instead to mourning. She wore black often, long before it was expected. She commissioned elaborate funeral effigies for her dead infants, turning grief into ritual. Where her husband governed, she painted. Where the court laughed, she wept in private chapels. Anne expressed herself not through counsel, but through creativity. Through art, architecture, and pageantry, she found a muted voice. But her body, ravaged by pregnancy, labor, and loss, never fully recovered. She was crowned in splendor, yet her life was spent in quiet devastation. Anne of Denmark never ruled a kingdom, but she carried one, again and again, inside her breaking frame. And with every life that slipped away, she was left holding a title, but never the future she was promised to bear. Now we move to the 3rd royal woman, one of the most powerful and cunning figures of the medieval world. Eleanor of Aquitaine, a duchess, a queen of France, then of England, a woman who wielded her fertility not as a duty, but as a weapon. She gave birth to 10 children, each one a thread in the political web she spun across Europe. Through her, 2 rival empires were bound. Through her, the Plantagenet dynasty exploded into prominence. Her sons were not simple princes, they were warriors, kings and rebels. Richard the Lionheart, King John. She raised legends in her blood, but once her usefulness ended, so did her freedom. After decades of bearing heirs, securing alliances, and shaping court politics, Eleanor was betrayed by the man she once called king, Henry II of England. Suspicious of her influence and threatened by her ambition, he had her imprisoned. Years passed while she lived behind stone walls. Her body aged, and her voice was silenced. The same woman who had once negotiated with popes and princes was left to rot in domestic obscurity. Her body had once built empires. But once her womb was empty, her power faded in the eyes of men. Yet even in confinement she endured, outliving her husband, guiding her sons, dying not as a victim, but as a matriarch whose legacy could not be erased. Eleanor's children inherited crowns and swords, but none inherited the iron beneath her silence. She was mother, ruler, prisoner, and never defeated. Now we come to the 1st royal woman, the final name on this descent through royal fertility, and perhaps the most forgotten victim of dynastic obsession. Empress Maria Josepha of Bavaria, the first wife of Emperor Joseph II of the Holy Roman Empire, and the woman's history buried in silence. She was crowned with promise, married into the powerful Habsburg court, expected to continue the bloodline, expected to breed an empire, and she tried. She became pregnant more than 20 times. Nearly every time, the result was loss, miscarriage after miscarriage, stillborn infants, tiny cries that never came, a nursery that never filled. Her body, a temple constantly broken open and rebuilt, each time more fragile, more ghostly. She wore jewels in public, but her skin was pale with grief. Her name appeared in court documents, but her voice is absent from history. She lived in a state of perpetual mourning, surrounded by midwives, priests, and the dead. Her husband, Joseph II, grew cold, frustrated, withdrawn. The dynasty he dreamed of was slipping away, child by invisible child. Eventually, he turned from her, leaving her alone to suffer the quiet collapse of hope. One failed pregnancy at a time. Maria Josepha bore more royal deaths than any queen before her, and yet, she is rarely mentioned, because her story was not about power or policy. It was about pain, repeated, unacknowledged, and buried beneath the crown she could never truly wear. They were queens, empresses, and consorts. Their portraits hang in palaces. Their names echo through marble halls and gilded archives. But beneath the velvet, beneath the diamonds, was a body, stretched, torn, emptied again and again. Fertility made them powerful and powerless. Each of these women bore kingdoms in their wombs. They created dynasties, secured borders, and stitched empires together through blood and childbirth. Their sons became kings, their daughters became queens, but their own voices were silenced behind the nursery door. They were celebrated for how many children they produced, but not how many they buried. They were honored for securing alliances, but not for enduring miscarriages in silence. Every birth was a duty, every death a private grief erased from public memory. They were born to breed, and when their usefulness ended, when the womb emptied, when the crown rested heavier, I were forgotten, imprisoned, exiled, or simply ignored. These royal women created history, but their pain was never written into it, because behind every empire lies a cradle, and behind every cradle was a woman who bled for a future that would never remember her name.